Hey, everybody. Welcome. It's Dr. Daniel from the Neuropathy Clinic at Fix Me. And what I'm going to do today is to talk about table salt. I know we're all told to avoid salt. Salt's bad. Too much salt causes problems. Too much salt raises your blood pressure. Avoid salt at all costs. Blah, 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 blah. However, salt is a vital and necessary component of our physiology. And what I mean by that is when we talk about how cells work on something called a gradient. And basically what that means is things go downhill. If we imagine that this is the cell membrane, and this is the inside of the cell, and this is the outside of the cell, the majority of sodium actually is held outside the cell. And then what happens is that it's used in something called the sodium-potassium pump. So we have potassium inside the cell, sodium outside the cell, and it moves that gradient, and that creates the ability, specifically in the case that we care about most in the kidneys, is the ability to eliminate wastes. And so the interesting thing is that increased salt intake was only shown in 1% of the people to cause an increase in blood pressure. So when we look at it, and you can ask yourself, have you ever known anybody that's been able to control their blood pressure just by eliminating salt? I'll answer that one for you. No, because it doesn't work like that. Specifically, what's happening when people's blood sugar goes up, the majority of the time, is insulin/insulin resistance, and that's related to carbs and processed foods. However, you will not more than likely ever hear somebody in allopathic medicine, Western medicine, tell you, hey, just avoid the processed carbs, stick to a Paleolithic anti-inflammatory eating plan, and you'll be okay. Now, certainly exceptions do exist, but the vast majority are just going to write your prescription. And the reason why that's an issue is because metabolic dysfunction is the first domino in the neuropathy process. And what I mean by that is there are always three processes involved with neuropathy. Number one, we have the metabolic system. Number two, we have the circulatory system. And number three, we have the neurological system. And so what happens is the cascade is we get metabolic inflammation, which then leads to decreased circulation. And of course, if we have decreased circulation, then what happens is that we're not getting the blood and oxygen out to the extremities. The feet specifically is usually where it starts, sometimes hands. And so we don't get oxygen and nutrients out to the nerves so that it can maintain and repair that myelin sheath. That myelin sheath is the insulation around the nerves that protects the nerves. Of course, nerves are very delicate, can't be exposed to anything. You'll know, like if you basically on our last nerve, well, that's an expression because getting on the nerve is extraordinarily painful, as you already know, if you do have neuropathy the majority of the time. And so it's important that we get enough blood flow out to the extremities so that we get the ability to repair and maintain the insulation around the nerves so our nerves can remain protected. But blood pressure dictates that to a degree. And so if we have a reduction in blood pressure, which is associated with medications, which is necessary, of course, we don't want unchecked high blood pressure, but the body raises, by smart, it raises blood pressure so that it can get enough blood flow out to the extremities. And then when we have to control or manage it with a medication, the blood pressure goes down, which means the circulation decreases, and then we're not getting the oxygen and nutrients out to the nerves. And so the myelin sheath, that insulation starts to break down. Does that happen overnight? No, it can take months to years. And so very often patients will be like, oh, my neuropathy just started last year, or my neuropathy just started last month, when in fact, the process leading to the neuropathy had been occurring for 2, 3, 4 years, maybe even longer. And so that comes back to a choice, a lifestyle choice, which is, what we choose to put in our bodies. And many times patients aren't told what to avoid or are told certain things are okay. Whole grain bread is okay. Nothing could be further from the truth. Whole grain bread actually increases the duration of the sugar release in your body because it's harder to break down, which means that insulin release is sustained, and sustained insulin release is going to lead to insulin resistance, which is a significant form of inflammation for a metabolic system, which is going to lead to the decreased circulation, which is going to lead to the damage of the nerves. And so all of those things play together. And so if we're taking a medication to reduce blood pressure, which we need to do, obviously, then what's going to happen is that there's no free lunch. Something else is going to happen elsewhere. And that elsewhere many times is the blood flow to the extremities is going to be inadequate. And then very often patients will tell me, hey, I had my blood flow tested, it's okay. Well, there's a normal range. Your requirements may be higher than somebody else's. It may not test, it may not show in a test. When you're talking about you're having neurological disturbances and numbness, cold, burning, pain, tingling, balance issues, those are all signs that you're getting nerve damage. I don't need to run a test on you, a painful test, mind you, the NCD EMG test, nor do I need blood flow to tell you that you've got problems with both those systems, because as I very often say, in neuropathy, there are three systems that are always involved. And again, number one, the metabolic system, number two, the circulatory system, and number three, of course, the neurological system. That's the only one we notice. That's the one that allopathic Western medicine will treat, because they're just going after the symptoms, which is a very small part of the big problem, because it's the loss of insulation, that myelin sheath protecting the nerve, that's the problem. And so when I started all this, like cutting out salt. Well, salt actually helps. That salt gradient actually helps drive flow and reduce blood pressure. And so if we're avoiding salt, we're defeating a mechanism of how the body actually works by creating gradients, by having a high sodium gradient to a low sodium gradient, so that we're creating flow and pushing out fluid. And so it's very interesting that when we use medications to short circuit the process, the natural process, we start to have other problems. And so salt's not your enemy, neither is blood pressure medication. But that being said, we should always be looking ways to reduce, minimize, or when possible, eliminate our reliance on medications, because generally that means there's something else going on with our body that isn't correct, and that's going to cause other problems. Again, the one that I deal with most often, of course, is the neuropathy. Neuropathy is very much a lifestyle disease. Of course, there are certain instances, we see traumas, chemo, toxic exposures, so like jet fuel, Agent Orange. And that's not a comprehensive list, it's just a very small sample. But the majority of cases are secondary to a lifestyle choice, which then leads to that inflammation, which leads to loss of circulation. And of course, can't get the blood flow out with the oxygen nutrients to the nerves, then that myelin sheath breaks down, and then over time we start to experience problems. That's why neuropathy can be up and down. Not always, but it can be up and down, like, oh, well, some days really bad, sometimes better. It can be what we ate, it can be the decreased activity, which leads to decreased flow. That's why when sometimes people lie down at night, the body calms down. And with the calming down of the body, the heart's not beating as hard, not pushing as much blood out to the extremities, and then the nerves start screaming because they're like, hey, we need help. And so all of that is the long way to say that we need to, of course, focus on lifestyle choices. We need to eat an anti-inflammatory diet. We don't need to avoid salt, like they say. It doesn't actually affect our blood pressure, and we need salt. We need sodium for that gradient, for that sodium, potassium, sodium pump in our kidneys specifically. All that is very important for function. And so if this is the first time you're hearing all of this, hit a like. You learned something new today. That's one of the reasons why I do these videos. I am here to help. We'll also put our contact information below in the link, because if you want the anti-inflammatory eating plan, happy to share that for free. My pleasure. Give you a list, and if it's on the list, eat it. If it's not on the list, don't eat it. And we'll go more into that in an upcoming video when I talk about the most dangerous place in America, and actually even in the world. But that's all for this video. Thank you. Have a great day. And again, please contact us if you have any questions. Thank you.